Hey Gators, this is Mr. Burr reading chapters 4, 5, and 6 from Flora and Ulysses. Chapter 4. A surprisingly helpful cynic. Flora ran from her room. She ran down the stairs. As she ran, she thought, for a cynic, I'm a surprisingly helpful person. She went out the back door. Her mother called to her. She said, "Where are you going, Flora Belle?" Flora didn't answer her. She never answered her mother when she called her Flora Belle. Sometimes she didn't answer her mother when she called her Flora either. Flora ran through the tall grass and cleared the fence between her yards and the Tickums in a single bound. "Move out of the way," said Flora. She gave Mrs. Tickum a shove and grabbed a hold of the vacuum cleaner. It was heavy. She picked it up and shook it. Nothing happened. She shook harder. The squirrel dropped out of the vacuum cleaner and landed with a plop on the grass. He didn't look that great. He was missing a lot of fur. Vacuumed off, Flora assumed. His eyelids fluttered. His chest rose and fell, and rose again, and then it stopped moving altogether. Flora knelt. She put a finger on the squirrel's chest. At the back of each issue of The Illuminated Adventures of the Amazing Incandesto, there was a series of bonus comics. One of Flora's very favorite bonus comics was entitled, "Terrible Things Can Happen to You." As a cynic, Flora found it wise to be prepared. Who knew what horrible, unpredictable thing would happen next? "Terrible Things Can Happen to You" detailed what action to take if you inadvertently consumed plastic fruit. This happens more often than you would suppose. Some plastic fruit was extremely realistic looking. How to perform the Heimlich maneuver on your elderly Aunt Edith if she choked on a stringy piece of steak at an all-you-can-eat buffet. What to do if you were wearing a striped shirt and a swarm of locusts descended. Run. Locusts eat stripes. And, of course, how to administer everyone's favorite life-saving technique. CPR. Terrible Things Can Happen to You did not, however, detail exactly how someone was supposed to give CPR to a squirrel. "I'll figure it out," said Flora. "What will you figure out?" said Mrs. Tickum. Flora didn't answer her. Instead, she bent down and put her mouth on the squirrel's mouth. It tasted funny. If she were forced to describe it, she would say that it tasted exactly like squirrel. Fuzzy, damp, slightly nutty. "Have you lost your mind?" said Mrs. Tickum. Flora ignored her. She breathed into the squirrel's mouth. She pushed down on the small chest. She started to count. Chapter 5. The Squirrel Obliges. Something strange had happened into the squirrel's brain. Things had gone blank. Black. And then, into this black blankness, there came a light so beautiful, so bright, that the squirrel had to turn away. A voice spoke to him. "What's that?" said the squirrel. The light shone brighter. The voice spoke again. "Okay," said the squirrel. "You bet." He wasn't sure what exactly he was agreeing to, but it didn't matter. He was just so happy. He was floating in a great lake of light, and the voice was singing to him. Oh, it was wonderful. It was the best thing ever. And then there was a loud noise. The squirrel heard another voice. This voice was counting. The light receded. "Breathe!" the new voice shouted. The squirrel obliged. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and then another, and then another. The squirrel returned. Chapter 6. In the event of a seizure. "Well, he's breathing," said Mrs. Tickum. "Yes," said Flora, "he is." She felt a swell of pride. The squirrel rolled over onto his stomach. He raised his head. His eyes were glazed. "For heaven's sake," said Mrs. Tickum, "look at him." She chuckled quietly. She shook her head, and then she laughed out loud. She kept laughing. She laughed and laughed and laughed. She laughed so hard that she started to shake. Was she having some kind of fit? Flora tried to remember what "terrible things can happen to you" advised in the event of a seizure. It had something to do with moving the tongue out of the way or stabilizing it with a stick or something. Flora had saved the squirrel's life. She didn't see any reason she couldn't save Mrs. Tickum's tongue. The sun sank a little lower in the sky. Mrs. Tickum continued to laugh hysterically, and Flora Belle Buckman started looking around the Tickums' backyard for a stick.